Hi everyone. In this video I'm going to talk you through how to answer question 3 on paper 1 of the Edexcel GCSE English language exam, and we're going to be looking at the June 2017 paper, and there'll be a link below for you to download it if you need to, and don't forget to have a look at the other questions as well on my other videos. Okay, so the first thing that we need to remember for question 3 is, if you have a look at the bottom here, it's only 6 marks, okay? And they only give you 1 page to write it in. So unless you've got enormous handwriting, you shouldn't be needing to get extra paper to answer this question. And often students can do a perfectly good answer in only half this amount of space, okay? So don't be thinking you've got to write a lot. The important thing to remember here as well is you need to write about language and structure, okay? So if you only write about one of them, you will only be able to get a maximum of 2 marks. So what we're looking for is 1 paragraph on language and 1 paragraph about structure, at least, okay? And actually just 1 paragraph of each, if they're well done, is perfectly adequate. And I'll talk in a little minute about what the difference is between language and structure. Okay, and the other really important thing to note is that you must answer the question as normal in exams, of course. You must answer the question. So in this time it's asking, how does the writer's use of language and structure show the narrator's thoughts and feelings? Okay, so it won't always be about the narrator's thoughts and feelings. You need to read whichever exam paper you get, so however they word it this time, you need to relate it to the question. So the question is here, the narrator's thoughts and feelings. And you, of course, again, need to make sure that you look at the correct line numbers, okay? So in a minute, I'm going to show you the text, and what I want you to do is to have a look if you can find at least 1 example of how the writer uses language and 1 example of structure to show the narrator's thoughts and feelings. Okay, so it's important to find a bit of language or a bit of structure that you can understand and write about, but also it needs to relate to the question. So if you find something that's totally unrelated, that's not going to get you really many marks. Okay, so just to recap then about what is language and structure. So if we have a look here, the easiest way to think about language is it's just words, okay? So the easiest thing to do is just to find a word which you think shows the narrator's thoughts and feelings, and then write the word blah 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 shows that the narrator is feeling blah blah blah, okay? If you're very confident with your grammar terminology, you can call it an adjective or an adverb or a noun or a verb or whatever it is, but it's not necessary to do that to get the marks. The most important thing is to explain how it relates to the question, okay? So don't get too worried if you're not very confident about your grammar features, okay? And then structure is how the words are strung together. So the people are pretty good actually at spotting things like repetition and listing and short sentences, but the problem here comes is people don't really know how to explain why it relates to the narrator's thoughts and feelings, okay? So I would say the top tip here is to say it emphasizes, okay? So the repetition emphasizes how shocked he is, or the listing emphasizes how much detail he's going into because he's so curious or whatever. So just think about what is it really the writer's saying or the narrator's thinking or feeling, and then just say that whatever the feature is emphasizes it, okay? Short and long sentences, the same thing. Why is it so short or long? What's that emphasizing? And then with punctuation, I think, again, the easiest one to write about is things like exclamations, because that's going to show a very strong feeling. What strong feeling is it? Or a question. Now, questions aren't always to make the reader think. Sometimes they're just to show that the narrator is confused. Maybe he's questioning himself, okay? So again, be careful with that. Make sure you're really thinking about how it's being used in this context. Okay, so let's have a look at the paper. So remember, it was lines 12 to 29, so it's a really good idea to mark those out so you don't use the wrong lines. okay? And what I'd like you to do is to pause the recording and see if you can find at least one example of a word, which would be language, and at least one example of some kind of structural feature, which, and think about for both of them, which show the narrator's thoughts and feelings. Okay, so how did you get on? So I'm going to show you a couple of things that I think are nice, straightforward things to write about in this case. So first of all, I looked attentively at her. So we know that's the narrator because it's I. So I looked attentively. I looked attentively at her. So what you need to do is say the word attentively shows that a narrator is feeling, and then don't just say attentive, because that doesn't really show that you know what attentively means. You need to think of a synonym. You need to think of another word that has a similar meaning to attentively to show that you understand it. So I looked at her, so you could say the narrator looked at her with a lot of concentration, and this shows that he was feeling really curious and interested and trying to work out who she was. Okay. Now, if you know your adverbs and your adjectives and stuff, you can say, oh, instead of just saying a word, you could say this was an adverb. Okay, but you don't need to do that. It just maybe, you know, it looks a bit more fancy. And then you've got some other words like distinctly, curiously, perplexingly. So you can see that for a slightly better answer, instead of just picking out the one word, you could say the writer uses a range of adverbs which all show how interested and curious he is. And then you could give a couple of examples. Okay, so that would do for language. Also, there are some other examples which I'll show you in a minute, but that would be a perfectly good answer then. So you write about that, about language, and then you need to write about structure. So I find it's quite helpful in the exam if you've got different colour highlighters, you can or pens, you can annotate in different colours for language and structure. So I'm going to do this one in red. So a couple of things here, which I would say, first of all, we've got a bit of listing here, haven't we? Bonnet, shawl, and a gown all of white. And we've also got, so we've got listing, and also we've got a very long sentence with lots of description in it. Okay, so you could write about either or both of those. And a lot of people would answer this saying, this paints a picture in the reader's head of what the woman looks like. Okay, yeah, it does paint a picture in the reader's head of what the woman looks like, but that's not really answering the question. The question is, how does the narrator think and feel? So what do we learn about what the narrator's feeling by the fact that he's gone into such a lot of description? And I think if you're really not, if you just see some normal person walking down the street, you wouldn't really look at them very closely, would you? But if you see someone that you think, oh, that's really strange, why are they dressed like that? Why are they out here? Like, you know, if it doesn't quite fit your idea of normality, then you're going to be looking at them more closely. So I think that's what's happening here, is because he's really confused and curious about why this woman's here and he doesn't really know who she is or what she is. That's why he's looking really closely. So you could say that he goes into so much detail because he's looking at her really closely because he is so curious and interested. Okay, so let's just have a quick look about the way you could write this. So here's a simple way. You could say the writer uses the word, so for example, perplexingly, to show the narrator's thoughts and feelings. It shows the narrator feels, and then you'd say something like confused and curious, and then maybe about the woman. Okay, so that's fine for your language. And then if you want to write about structure, you'd say something like the writer uses listing, and then you do, and remember to do an example or a quote here. If it's a really long sentence or a list, you don't have to write the whole of it, but you could just write the beginning of it. And then this emphasises how much detail he's going into and how closely he's looking at the woman, for example. Okay, and there you go, you've got your language and your structure. So finally, we're just going to look at a couple of examples from the real exam and see, so you can see how many marks they would have got. So first of all, let's look at this one. So I'll just pause, if you just pause it and read it, and then we'll have a think about how many marks that would have got. Okay, so if you have a look at that one, the first paragraph doesn't really say anything, does it? Just about, it's got some things in the lines, but it's not saying anything, so it doesn't really get any marks. And then you've got, they talk about lists, so that's fine. So that is some structure that they've talked about lists, but it doesn't give an example, and here's the classic mistake. It makes it easier for the reader to read and imagine in their heads how she looks. Okay, fine, but it doesn't show the narrator's thoughts and feelings. Okay, so that would only get 1 mark, that one. Okay, so let's have a look at another one. Okay, so just have a look at the first paragraph, which actually is 2 paragraphs. The person's put 2 paragraphs in one really here. So just have a look at that one, pause it and have a look. So let's read the beginning. The writer shows the narrator feels intrigued by the woman. He looked attentively, which he wants to understand her because the adverb attentively has connotations of being eager to learn and alert. Okay, so that's a really good example of just writing about a word, and they've put an example and they've related it to that the narrator is eager to learn. Okay, so that's a language. So we've got language, and then the writer tells us the reader it was nearly 1 o'clock, and by presenting this information in a short sentence that suggests the narrator feels it's a surprising fact she's out at this time. Okay, so again, he's related, not just said it's a short sentence, but kind of tried to link it to how the narrator feels. And so we can use short sentences sometimes when we're surprised. So fantastic, that's a structure. Okay, then we've got another one. The narrator feels confused about the woman. Her voice is described as having something curiously still and mechanical. By using the word something, the reader is shown the narrator's perplexity because this word is very vague. The writer's use of okay, so that again, they've put 2 in 1 here. So we'll separate that one out. So again, the word something, so that's writing about language, and then colons and lists because he continues to add more and more description because he cannot fully fathom who he is. So again, we've got structure. Okay, so you can see that this person has just really, I mean, I know they've got quite small writing, but actually they've just been quite succinct. So they've done 2 language and 2 structure. In fact, you don't even need 2 language and 2 structure. You could just have 1 of each, or possibly an extra one, and you'll get the marks for how well you explain how it relates to the question, to the thoughts and feelings in this case, and how appropriate your quotes are. Okay, they've done a final paragraph here. I think this is completely unnecessary. This person has already got full marks. They've already got 6 out of 6. And in fact, this final paragraph is a little bit weak as well. They're trying to relate alliteration somehow, but it doesn't really work that well. So it just shows that, don't overdo it. And this person might have run out of time later on in the exam. So just focus on 1 or 2 language, 1 or 2 structure. And like I say, you don't even need that many. So in summary, make sure you write about language, and that can be as simple as the word, whatever, and then what that shows, what that means, and then structure. And remember, when you're trying to explain structure, just say it emphasises something, and then just think about what it is the writer's saying, what are they emphasising, and then remember to link it to the question, remember to relate it back to, in this case, the narrator's thoughts and feelings, but it could be something like build tension or something like that. So relate it back to the question. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for watching, and please like and comment, and look out for question 4.